Hello YouTube. Today I have come to the Tippecanoe battlefield. So I'm sure in grade school we pretty much all heard about Tippecanoe and Tyler 2. I don't really know what that all means. So let's go learn a little something new, shall we? The history of the area goes back way before the battle. I mean, the native peoples had migrated over the land bridge from Siberia and brought technology with them, and they were be able to communicate, and hunting skills, and throwing, accurate throwing skills, and they refined tools. And you get an idea, look at a nice display of the different different styles of points, and as they went along, and you get better and better. And then when the contact with the Europeans happened, you started getting other things like glass and whiskey bottles and ceramics and Venetian glass trade beads, and there's parts of a clay pipe, as well as knife blades, harpoons, and other kinds of trade goods. And the local natives would making baskets out of birch bark, and these things could be made waterproof with a little bit of pine pitch. And this bow here is from around 1800, although the arrows behind it are reproductions. But then contact with the European settlers led them to being able to get some flintlocks. Major leaders on the Native American side were, and I'm not sure I could pronounce this right, was Tenshawakatawa. He was also eventually known as the Prophet. He was the younger brother of Tecumseh, who was otherwise known as like Shooting Star or Crouching Panther, and he was really the military leader. And the Prophet had succumbed to alcohol when contact with the traders. He eventually he wasn't really popular because of that. He had a vision that the people should return to the old ways, and Tecumseh went along with him on that, and they try to get respect for the elders, and return to the old ways of growing and gathering food. And the message became very popular. He started getting more and more converts from the western tribes, and they pretty much decided that the Wabash River was the boundary between the Europeans and the European settlers and the Native Americans. And they settled in, what's the name of the town? I'm sorry. Or the confluence of the Tippecanoe River and the Wabash, I think, and became known as Prophetstown. And by the time 1811 came around, it was they had about 3,000 followers. So leader on the side of the Americans was William Henry Harrison, and his father, who had been a signer of the Declaration of Independence, but when he died, it did leave William without funds. His father's friend, who's Governor Henry Lee of Virginia, persuaded him to join the army and within 24 hours, was commissioned as an ensign in the Army and assigned to Cincinnati in the Northwest Territory. Army engaged in the ongoing war in the Northwest. He was with General Anthony Wayne at Fort Defiance and took part in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, which I talked about in a previous video. And in the, let's see, in 1801, he became in 1800, John Adams nominated him to become governor of the new territory that includes this area. And his main focus was to gain access to or ownership of the Indian lands, and that led to everything that follows. So, of course, the Battle of Fallen Timbers ended up with the treaty that was signed in Fort Wayne, and in Greenville, Ohio, that's where Tecumseh and his brother that's where they were, and they decided that with the encroachment of the whites, they were going to move farther west. Tecumseh went by horseback to scout out ahead, and his brother, who ended up being the prophet, and came with rafts with all the goods and stuff on it, and they ended up meeting up at where Tippecanoe and the Wabash converge, and they made the settlement about a mile away from there, about a mile actually from where we are, and where there was an 80-foot bluff, and obviously a little bit more defensive. Well, the prophet met with the governor, William Henry Harrison, and assured him that they did not want conflict, and but shortly after that, the British sent envoys to encourage him to push back on the Americans. Basically, the British were trying to use the natives to keep the U.S. from expanding to the west or to the north into Canada, and he did encourage the Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi to attack settlements. Well, the following summer, the prophet made another call on Harrison, and they were confronting him about the attacks, and when Harrison brought that up, this sort of depicts where Tecumseh got up and just yelled, "Harrison lies," and guns were cocked. Everybody's ready to fight. Cooler heads prevailed, and that was de-escalated. Because of the growing animosity and everything that, with the British stirring up the natives, they sent a regiment of regular army. Actually, there's a 4th regiment out of Vermont, came all the way out here, and on November 6th, 1811, emissaries from the prophet town, which, like I said, is about a mile away, came and assured, they agreed that no hostilities would happen. But the Army still, normal precautions, sentries, and night watch. And at 4 a.m. on the morning of November 11th, Harrison was just leaving his tent when the first shot rang out. The men, most of them jumped up, grabbed their rifles, went to their posts, and some were a little bit sluggish, and ended up when the natives actually broke into the lines, and some of them, met right outside their tent door. Well, here's a diorama of the battlefield, and this would have been Harrison's marquee tent, the troops stationed in their tents along here, and the first attack came from this direction, and then the second attack came this way, and they were able to get through, but Harrison on horseback and was able to, he survived the battle, no wounds. These guys came in, I can't really get into a lot more detail. The next thing came this way, and the battle lasted just till shortly after dawn, when the natives broke off and left. The army spent the rest of the day of November the 11th burying the dead, caring for their wounded. I think they had 46 dead, I think it was, and 151 wounded. It's about 20% of their force was casualties. Well, after the battle, the army, after taking care of their wounded and burying the dead, they went to Prophetstown the next day, found it deserted except for an old woman, and they set up a tent for her and burned the rest of the village. The Prophet had, and Tecumseh had fled up to Canada, and eventually Tecumseh came back down and in 1812 rebuilt Prophetstown, but it was never as big or as populated as it was before. He was eventually killed up in Canada after during the, what was that? He died in battle in 1813, so a couple years later. This picture up here is actually a copy of a portrait of the Prophet done by George Catlin, who traveled all over the West and did lots of portraits of many natives, very famous for that. You look him up. He found him to be somewhat melancholy and still had a hardcore followers, but not as many. And when he did die, he's buried someplace basically under the streets of Kansas City, or what is now Kansas City, Kansas. Well, Tecumseh came back and said he did rebuild Prophetstown to some extent, but in 1812, about 1,300, somewhere between 1,300 and 2,000 men under General Samuel Hopkins came back, and what they called the Second Battle of Tippecanoe. They came back basically to destroy Prophetstown again, and when the group of soldiers captured a Winnebago woman, and from her the army learned a large war party composed mostly of Shawnee and Kickapoo warriors was encamped east of the Wabash, and then Indians anticipated the soldiers' return the following day and set up a trap in nearby ravine, and they drove them off. They only killed one man, and so that was the Second Battle of Tippecanoe. Well, President Madison used the British influence here as one of the points, along with the press gangs of the British, you know, grabbing American ships and pressing the sailors onto British ships. But they use this as one of the reasons to go to war with England, or in the War of 1812. By 1840, Harrison campaigned and won the presidency, and his vice president candidate was a fellow Virginian, John Tyler, and that's where we got the political slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So he used his victory here as a part of his persona to get the presidency. So here's the monument here on the actual battlefield of Tippecanoe, and it's dedicated to the people who lost their lives here. So you get an idea of the battlefield. It does drop off over there, and there's a few markers around. The one over there is to a Major Davis who lost his life here. And a lot of these, the bigger trees, like that one, were here at the time of the battle. I think I figure that was 208 years ago, this coming November 7th. And so those probably were here too. A couple of three big oak trees. Well, I'm going to leave you now, and hopefully you've learned a little bit about what lays behind the political slogan that we all knew was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. So I'm going to get on the road and see what I can find. See you later, YouTube. So here's something I see very rarely. There's a way to get up and over the fence without opening up the gate. They tell me it's basically, it was here because they used to graze livestock on the other part of the park. And why don't you, if you know the name of what this is, I mean, I know what it is, put it in the comments below and see if anybody else can figure out what this staircase over the fence is called.